Uh, we are a bit ahead. We are already a bit late. What I want to talk about today is kind of different flavor of Kanban. Because when we are thinking about Kanban, we usually think about applying Kanban on team level. I want to share with you some basics of portfolio Kanban, why you may want to try portfolio Kanban out in your organization, and why portfolio Kanban is kind of low friction method that can improve the effectiveness of your organization. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Pawel, and I'm very serious C-level exec, as you can see. I lead Lunar Logic. Lunar Logic is a Ruby software house in Krakow, Poland, and we deeply care about the quality of stuff we create. So if you have Ruby project, feel free to send it our way. We are also creators of Kanbanery, an online Kanban tool. And I want to start with a confession. I've been managing and supervising multiple concurrent projects for at least 8 years already. And it sucks big time. I mean, being a person responsible for running multiple projects is like having this kind of roller coaster experience. On one day, the guys ask you, whether you can start a new project. On the other, you have to deal with emergency situation. Then you have to make decisions about all sorts of decisions about staffing your projects, and you end up making all those decisions based on gut feels. Because when you end up trying to come out with some reasonable information, you end up with something I call Excel frenzy. This Excel sheet is supposed to tell you everything about all projects you run. Like, there are all sorts of meaningful data here. And then, if there is this emergency situation, you have to answer looking at this Excel sheet where to pull people from to deal with this emergency. You have to answer looking at this Excel sheet whether you can start a new project, how much more people you need. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a pervert. I love Excel. I love statistics. But it just doesn't do the job. It doesn't answer all those questions. Because when you try to find meaningful data in tools like this, and these are, by the way, these are typical tools that are supposed to help us when dealing with portfolio, with all portfolio-related decisions. It's like finding a path in the jungle. No clue. So basically, given such situation, you end up in one of two modes. One mode is you'll make it. Like, there comes decision maker and says you'll make it. Like, no matter what, you'll make it. You will start a new project, you will finish this one on time, you'll deal with emergency, you'll make it. No matter what teams say, no matter how overburdened they already are, there is this very important person that says you'll make it. So we are basically introducing more and more work in progress to our system if we look at the whole organization as a system. The other mode is basically the same, but it has different roots. Like, give me more. This is even worse because teams don't even realize they have a problem. They already have a problem trying to cope with too many different tasks, too many projects, too much work. But basically, it's the same. Like, we will make it. We will manage somehow. And trying to work like this, inevitably you end up in a situation where there's too many projects, too many tasks to cope at the same time, just too much work, and it doesn't come for free. Or maybe it does. Like, who in this room thinks that context switching or multitasking comes for free? Anyone? And who has the boss that thinks that context switching comes for free? Oh, I see a potential on this job market. But basically, we know that it's not free, right? When we look for sources, like Jerry Weinberg, for each concurrent task we start, we pay a tax of context switching of 20% of our time. So for 2 tasks, we lose as much as 20% of our time on multitasking, on context switching. For 3, 40% of our time. For 4 concurrent tasks, we lose as much as 60% of our time on multitasking. Now, think what happens in our portfolio. The constant multitasking. Do this and do that at the same time, because we just cannot pass this opportunity. We cannot say no to this client because it is the biggest client of ours. We just cannot say no to this big project that comes our way. But when you think about portfolio level, it's even worse than that, because if you think about context switch between one project and the other project, it's like a huge change. It's not just another software development task within the same general context. Like, what happens when a developer joins a new project? He loses like a couple of weeks just to learn what the whole project is all about, just to learn the context, just to learn all the work that has already been done. And then there are lots and lots of problems introduced by such a developer because he just doesn't know. He just doesn't know all the previous discussions, etc., etc. There is also something called Zeigarnik effect. It is the observation made about humans that we have this tendency to interrupt ourselves whenever our previous task was incomplete. So basically, such a guy that was pulled from one project, he didn't finish his work there. He's pulled to another project to do whatever, to deal with emergency, because we have to start this project. He keeps thinking about the old project. So basically, even if we organize his work in a way that he can be focused on a single task, he will be interrupting himself, thinking about the old project. And this is very consistent with observations made by A.L. Ophir. A.L. Ophir from Stanford University did a lot of work, a lot of research on multitasking and its effect on our work. So A.L. Ophir basically came up with the same conclusion, that the cost of context switching is deeply rooted in our own interference about thoughts that about job we are not doing right now. It's not only switching from one task to the other. It's also thinking about the job that we don't do. Like, for example, right now I have an email, an important email I have to answer. And I keep thinking about it. Like, if I'm lucky, I won't distract myself to the point that I will lose context. But I keep thinking about that. It doesn't help. And there's obviously time to market, like something that is important for our clients, for our users. So here we have a couple of scenarios. First endeavor, we start project A, then we switch to project B, then we switch to project C, then we come back to project A, etc., etc., etc. In the second scenario, we start new endeavor only when we are finished with the previous one. Not only total time is shorter, like obvious, less context switching, but also we deliver faster. We deliver the first thing way faster. Time to market is shorter. We get feedback faster. We can learn from this feedback. We can improve work on further work. Then, again, A.L. Ophir, his work on impact of multitasking on quality of our work. So guys from Stanford did this research when they asked people to do very, very simple tasks, right? Recognizing colors. This is red, this is green. And multitaskers were making way more mistakes than people that were focused on a single task. Like, with such a simple thing like recognizing green from red, or sounds or letters. Like, well, and if you bring such environment to knowledge work, to building software, like, what can happen? Again, it's even worse. So the last but not least, frustration. I have a friend, let's call him John. His story is his story is basically like this. He was working on internal project he liked, He felt like it was his project. But after a few weeks, there was this new investment project that was started in the company, and everyone that could be pulled to this new project was pulled. Obviously, John was one of the guys. So the first switch, but then CEO who was using this internal project that John was developing earlier found a bug. And if the CEO finds a bug, well, it's sort of important. So John came back to his original project. Then before he moved back to the investment project, his team pulled him to help with some of their internal stuff. And then when John wanted to finally go back to this investment project, there was an emergency situation. And there was this need to pull some people to fix this issue. Like during the course of 2 months, John switched projects 5 times. How do you feel John felt? He was totally frustrated. He was stressed because he didn't know what is going to happen. He couldn't build a connection with his team. So this is another cost we pay. Cost we pay with people being burned out. And when I think about all those problems, I think that we already know the cure. We face very similar problems on team level, and here's the solution we often apply. We apply Kanban, so our work is organized better, so we have less work in progress. So we address the problem of multitasking, problem of context switching, problem of a lot of stress across our teams. And this is why I started my experiment with portfolio Kanban. It wasn't even a proper experiment because I didn't have kind of fixed hypothesis. I just thought that it might work and I want to try. So how would you start? Well, I started trying to apply kind of very common, very typical approach to organize process on portfolio level. So here we have projects that are planned. Here we have very simple flow for projects that are ongoing. And finally, well, in that environment, we didn't have a project. Project was never done. It just was going to maintenance. But this was validated, by the way. So we can have something that is not done, but is validated. Seems right. Well, not exactly. Because when you think about it, like, don't take pictures of this slide. It's wrong. And I will tell you why. When you think about it, you're facing one thing that is not present usually on team, that is usually not present on team level, which is huge variability. Like, sizes of projects vary very much. For example, the first organization when I was playing with portfolio Kanban, smallest project, single person, 2 months. Biggest project, 25 people, 1.5 years. Lunar Logic, where I currently work, smallest project, a pair of developers, couple of weeks. Biggest project, 6 to 8 people, 1.5 years. And still not done. Like, I'm talking about differences like 1 to 200. If we try to translate it to team level, to development tasks, it would be like having a task that takes anything between half a day and half a year. And why this is a problem? Well, first thing is that if you have many of those long tasks, those huge projects, the board becomes stalled. Like, nothing moves. And this is why this is a problem. It is kind of psychological problem. Because if you have this tool, this visual tool, and you don't touch it for some time, you just stop using it. It's stalled. It's not alive. It's well, basically, it's not up to date. And when the board is not up to date, you can trash it anyway, because it does not add value. So this was one problem. The second problem is, try to apply WIP limits here. Like, given that any single of those cards can be worth a dozen of others, like, what kind of number we should put here? Like, is 7 okay? Is 8 okay? But then if we finish this huge project and we can start a dozen of small ones, then the number of 10 wouldn't make sense at all. So this is why when you are thinking about visualizing a portfolio Kanban, you should probably think about alternative approach. But a side note is that there are exceptions. There are exceptions where you can use this approach perfectly. And these are organizations that have full control over what they build. So there are more product organizations than project organizations. So they can use a very similar board, a two-tier board, where they put projects or epic features or MVPs or MMFs or whatever they use, kind of in swim lanes, and then have detailed flow inside. So here we have a WIP limit of 4 of these big things, because we have only four swim lanes. So if you are lucky enough that you can use this approach, good for you. But few organizations are lucky enough. So basically, you have to think about different board design, because the standard board designs doesn't address board designs don't address typical flow of portfolio of things happening on portfolio level. So here is what I ended up with. And don't treat, like, remember this slide, not this slide. Don't treat it as the only way of visualizing portfolio, project portfolio. So I ended up having, I ended up having columns as a timeline. So basically columns are months, and rows are teams. So this is a matrix that shows which team will be working on what, when. And those sticky notes that are inside are some kind of a representation of a project. Now, it can be just a project, as it was initially in my case, but discussing with David Anderson this thing, David proposed that it should be, actually, there should be MMFs. And it's kind of a nice idea, because if you have this long project that lasts like 8 months, you don't have, here you don't see what's happening like month after month. And if you had here MMFs or MVPs, I'm using those 3 letters abbreviations, MMF, minimal marketable feature, MVP, minimal viable product. So basically kind of epic thing to be built. So you can perfectly put them here. So what do you see on such a board? Like, seems simple, right? What do you see on such a board? First thing, well, this very board was used on team level. So you have teams here, like every single row is a team. But it can be perfectly used on individual level. Like, it only depends on scale you're applying this board. If this team was 150 people, like having 150 rows doesn't make sense. But I'm using such a board in context of 20-something people, like probably 3 teams, and they're changing. So it does more make sense. It does make sense to use it at individual level. We also see total capabilities. Like, this is only that much work we can chew. Okay. Once everyone is filled with something, building something, we cannot take anymore. Then we have different capabilities. Like, every single team can have different skills. For example, we have teams that can deal with this kind of project or that kind of project because they have skill matter experts. We can have teams that are specialized in this technology or that technology. So we can show that here, that it's not basically, team A doesn't equal team B. They are different. They can deal with different stuff. Then we have 3 capabilities. So we have some commitments. So we can take only that much more work and deal with that. Well, we have obviously commitments. Like, every single sticky here is some sort of commitment. We promised to build something for this client. It may be specified better, it may be specified worse, but we see that our people will be working on something. Then we have all sorts of concurrent engagements, something we want to see. All those multitasking cases, all those context switches, like here, single team working on two different projects, two different products. It's even worse when we use it on individual level, because then we basically don't want to see such situations. And the more things we see, the bigger problem of multitasking is. Then we have expected time span. We see how long it's going to last, which we obviously wouldn't see on the kind of standard board design. Is this project is going to last a month, half a year and a half, a week? So here we see that. We see different types of work. In this case, EO stickies are connected with new projects, violet stickies are connected with maintenance work, and the fun story is with red stickies. Red stickies is basically, in this case, work that we are not going to be paid for. This was fixed price project. Fixed price project that wasn't completed on time. So basically there is still work to be done, but we won't get more money for that, but we still have to do it. And we want to see such situations. Basically, like typical situation in many organizations would be like, it would be half red. Like half of the projects are over time, which shows a problem, which basically shows a problem. I don't say it gives you a solution, but at least it allows you to start talking about it. Then you have all sorts of future commitments. If you are committed to start work later, not just now, you can perfectly show that. You have all sorts of planned but not yet committed work. So you know that there are those few projects that you might work on in future. So basically, you have also kind of a simple, easy way to show how your sales funnel works. And you can show all sorts of unavailability of your teams. So for example, during summer months, people are expected to take some time off to go for vacations. You can show that. Like during those months, your total capabilities are different because people are out of the office. Now, show me all those things here. Like this Excel sheet is supposed to cover all important data. So this is why visualization is some sort of low-hanging fruit. Like you can visualize your portfolio in this way or any other that makes sense, and you start seeing problems. You start seeing all the overcommitments. You start seeing all the multitasking issues. You start seeing all the work that was poorly planned. So you are doing, for example, a lot of delayed, overdue work. So those red stickies. So you can start discussing those things. So it's basically showing those big problems. You don't see those big problems here. There are numbers, names of clients, probabilities. No problems whatsoever. What about WIP limits then? Because, well, we haven't seen WIP limits yet. And this is kind of a big thing of Kanban. We want to limit work in progress. We want to limit projects or products in progress because we want to limit the pain attached to multitasking, to context switching. Well, let's start with free capabilities. So here, like seeing how much work we can do, and we see how much work we can do at any given time. We see how much work we can do tomorrow, and we see how much work we can do in 5 months from now. And by the way, this is important because projects or products, unlike features, don't happen overnight. Like we don't learn today that tomorrow we start this big project. There's long process attached to kind of learning that sales process, negotiations, etc., etc. The other day I was consulting in one of big Polish companies. So they have a project to choose a vendor for their HR system that lasts 18 months. Just simply choosing a vendor, and then the real project starts. So they know in advance that this is going to happen. So we can plan that. We can plan whether we can afford starting a new project. And when something bad happens, when we have to react, when we have to, for whatever reasons, pull people to something else, we know where we can pull people from. And we can make those decisions consciously. Like, how much does it cost us? Like, the more concurrent projects we introduce, the bigger the task of context switching is. So basically, you end up with something that I call whip limits by conversation. And I credit Klaus Leopold for the term. I learned it from him. So having all the data visualized vaguely, but seeing that you can start talking. Like, we cannot afford starting another project. Or if we have to start this project, it will cost us. We can choose what it will cost us, like where we are going to pay this price, what we want to do, what work will be delayed, or what work will be trashed. But we start those conversations. It's not you'll make it anymore. And this is basically where this Excel sheet, where my perversion have value. Because then you need to pull all the data from all those Excel sheets. What's the cost of delay of each project we talk about? What's the value, expected value of delivering this project? How much effort do we need to deliver this project? What's the cost of this project? So you basically have to feed this nice portfolio Kanban board with important bits of data from either such a tool or another tool that you're using, kind of budgeting tool, whatever it is. The nice thing is that you don't need all those bits of data. Like, there are just few crucial information that you need. And basing on them, and basing on what you see on portfolio Kanban board, you can start making reasonable decisions. You can start making reasonable trade-offs. Now, I've told you just this nice story about portfolio Kanban based on a couple of implementations I know. But the question you should ask me is, what's in it for me? Why should you care? Why should you even try to apply portfolio Kanban in your organization? Well, let me start with the observation. Observation about our communities, lean community, agile communities. We are very strongly biased toward team level. Like, Scrum is basically a method that is a framework, however you call it, that was designed for a team level. When we are talking about implementing Kanban, it's so very often about team level. But very few organizations, team level is the whole. Because, well, it happens only if you have only one team. Like, then it is a whole. Most of our organizations I know have multiple teams. So when we look at the work of Eli Goldratt, it's like optimizing a team is basically optimizing a part of the system. And if we optimize all the parts of the system, we are probably going to end up with pretty suboptimal system as a whole. So when I'm looking at the work that is happening in our communities, I see a lot of optimizing parts. And don't get me wrong, that's great. We should do that. But we shouldn't forget about the other layer. Because on portfolio level, when there is chaos, when there are wrong decisions made on portfolio level, no matter how efficient our team will be, they will be producing waste. As Stephen Parry says, cheaper, neater, faster waste. Because the crap comes from the top, and they are just processing it. Arguably, like, improving only team level may be even counterproductive. Not even neutral, but counterproductive. Because then we produce only more waste. It's usually not that bad. I would argue that it's always counterproductive. But then, if we don't focus on portfolio level, it's just cheaper, neater, faster waste. And then finally, another systems thinker, John Seddon, points us that whenever we are doing the wrong thing, so again, the wrong thing, waste, crap, however we call it, comes from the top, and teams just are processing it. Whenever we are in this mode, the only thing that teams would do is making the wrong thing righter, just a bit righter, instead of learning. And we do need learning on all levels of our organization. So basically, if we don't allow teams to work on the right thing, we disable opportunities for teams to learn, because they are in constant emergency mode. They are all the time, they're overburdened. We don't give them time to improve. We don't give them slack that enables improvements. And the same happens on portfolio level. If we are always overburdened on portfolio level, we don't make conscious decisions about what's the next most valuable thing we can build. So we basically disable learning. And portfolio Kanban is something that can address this problem. The problem that is very often ignored, because it is easy to focus on our ineffective teams. It is easy to apply this or that method for a group of 7 people. It is difficult to go up there to all those decision makers and start changing the way they approach all the project-related decisions. So there's basically in many companies there is an elephant in the room, and everyone ignores it. And why portfolio Kanban? Because it is a method that is kind of low friction. Unlike team-level implementations of Kanban, portfolio Kanban can be started by a single person. You don't need buy-in of all those guys up there. You don't need buy-in of your whole PMO. Because when you start playing with portfolio Kanban, it's enough that a single person takes responsibility for keeping the board up to date, like starting with visualization. Why it is even possible? Because on team level, it just doesn't work. Like, I haven't seen a team that developed a Kanban board that was being maintained by a single person. So everyone has to update what they are doing. But on portfolio level, the board isn't changing that rapidly. Like, it's not like constant flow of things that are changing every single day. Like, projects usually last weeks, months, years. So it's not changing that rapidly. So one person can take responsibility for keeping it up to date. And if the board is designed well, the value of this board will very quickly draw attention of other people. They will start making their own project-related decisions or product-related decisions looking at the board. I've seen that. Like, when I was able to change kind of old-school CEO, I was able to change his behavior from discussing his budgeting tool I never understood to coming back to the wall full of colorful sticky notes. And we were making the same decisions, only better. Because people see the value. It's kind of instant value. And then, when you have that, people start signing on. Then decisions about kind of reasonable discussions over project-related issues start happening. Then you can enable WIP limits by conversation. Then you can start changing the way you approach your portfolio, which results in a way different environment for your teams to work in. And this is why you should try it out in your company. Thank you. Questions?
I just wonder whether your teams are fixed. Are they fixed for people, or do you change them on a regular basis?
So the question is whether teams are fixed or I'm changing them on a regular basis. Well, it depends. Like with Kanban, I haven't done kind of translation every single principle of Kanban to the start, but I could during the break. So you start with what you have basically. If you have fixed teams, you have fixed teams. If your teams are changing, well, your teams are changing. But then you can adjust that, you can adjust it on the board. So if you have a team of 10 people and a team of 5 people, and you make those, you make them 2 teams of 7 people and fire one more. You can just show that on your board, and then just capabilities of this very team will change. But there's as in general with Kanban and with Kanban portfolio specifically, there's no single answer. So you have to adjust, to the way you work. You have to find your way of visualizing such things.
How have you found that it's developed? So you start with a single person, and have you found in your experience that more people start getting involved and start adapting the board?
How can you rephrase?
So in terms of you set up a portfolio Kanban board, maybe it's one person, but how have you found the rest of the business has started to get involved? Those senior managers.
Because they keep coming to this board. Like, a tricky thing with the board is where to put it. Like, if you are talking about, organization that has at least a few hundred people, it's where to put it. I usually put it in a place that is often attended, like most often attended. Kitchen. Probably the best place would be kind of by the main entrance. But then nice trick I was using was it was board on wheels. So I could pull it wherever I wanted. So I started pulling it for a management meeting, kind of weekly meeting, and we started discussing the board. And then I found my CEO coming to the board to talk about new projects, because he wanted to know whether we can work on it or not. In fact, he wanted to know. We knew that we will have to work on it, but he wanted to know what's the cost. So what kind of work we will have to do. So it's like, you see that happening. You see people interacting with this physical whiteboard and those color sticky notes. Yeah.
Do you have to redraw your board every month?
Sorry?
Do you redraw your board every month? Because you show quite nicely 1 to 8, but obviously...
Yes. Yes, I do.
Right, okay.
This is kind of...
Oh, big deal. I just wondered if that's what you did.
Usually, if with board that you've seen with months, I was doing it quarterly, and it was like 13 months. So I wanted to see that, like, ideally the whole year, because this kind of perspective was interesting. Now I'm using board that covers 3 months, and I'm redrawing. Well, basically moving stickies every month. Yeah. So it's not like every single column. But when any single column gets out of date, that I'm changing, but after a few of them is outdated, I just leave everything.
Okay, thanks.
I may have missed something, but in your presentation you seemed to say that you went from the classic Kanban design to your one because you had an issue about sizing different pieces of work. I was just wondering why you made that decision rather than going for some sort of story point sizing on the piece of work.
I tried sizing. It wasn't a story point because, like, how many story point you?
Portfolio
Yeah.
sizing.
Because story well, any size. It's just a number. It's out. Here's the answer. I'm a visual person, so I wanted to see what is the difference, and here's the answer. Like, this is 200 smaller than this, and it really is. Like I did it this way. If I had 2 of those and wrote one of them and 200 on the other, it just doesn't speak to me. It's like, now you see that this one is smaller than that one, right? And this is why this design, because here the general size of the project is all the place that all stickies with the name of the project covers on the board. So this is kind of nice hack. So the more space stickies cover, the bigger the project is.
Will you show dependencies as well? Is it worth doing it? And if yes, how you do it?
Dependencies are tricky because, again, in this environment, most dependencies we've had were kind of internal, like not team to team, but person to person. For example, we have this kind of DB specialists that have to help us, and there's no nice way of showing that here. But then, if you, what happened here is basically almost every of those teams had their own team board, and they were trying to show dependencies there. And by the way, on a portfolio level, when it comes to having one person helping with that project, it's usually something on this level I don't care. And then one bit of information you get on this level is like this team leader knows where he can look for people that are not overburdened. So if we have, if he needs DB specialists, and DB specialists are here, here, and here, he will start here, because well, it's pretty likely that they have some slack. So it's another way, another way of kind of using this board to get better information.
Could you share some examples of techniques you've applied for like consistent sizing across these projects or epic? I mean, what sort of inputs you might take from the teams, or how would you sort of make sure that they are sort of sized consistently?
It's kind of beyond the scope because of this approach, because I was lucky to have some sort of sizing. Whenever something was going from here to here, I already had some sort of sizing. So it's kind of a different discussion. Like this doesn't really help with that. Carl, one last question.
Okay.
Okay.
Where are you capturing the assessment of whether you should do the project? So commercially, this makes sense. Technically, this makes sense. This is the team that we should associate. Are you capturing those kind of states before you can get into the team delivery?
Again, this is the part that is here. So it's kind of upstream. And I will encourage you, by the way, to visualize that as long as you have business people on board, and you can make stages out of that. So kind of make sense at all, make sense business-wise, make sense technically-wise, and the last decision is whether we can cope with that. But then it's kind of making the scope of the board broader.
Yeah, I guess it's a separate board, which is, does it make sense? Then it goes onto a board where it actually...
If you can put it on the same board, because it's a single whiteboard. If you can put it on the very same board, go for it, because you see the whole stream, and it's always better for the whole organization to know. So we run out of time. Thank you very much.